This is the third in the series of the upper limb. So this whole video, we're going to use a color-coded system. So the green is just to give us the stem for orientation, but the blue, we're going to use blue for motor, and we're going to use pink for sensory. So sensory is if you touch it, it hurts, and motor is it goes to some muscle and makes it do something. So all of these have at least one motor and one sensory component. So starting with the musculocutaneous nerve, we have this motor component that does not branch, and we have a sensory component. They're both together in the same nerve. Motor component first pierces the coracobrachialis. Sorry, both components first pierce the coracobrachialis. This is a muscle. Something like that, right? And as a general rule, if you pierce the muscle, you innervate it. So it innervates this coracobrachialis. The next thing this nerve does, both components, is lies in between the biceps brachii and the brachialis muscle. And it innervates both of those muscles. So it innervates three muscles, the coracobrachialis, the biceps brachii, and the brachialis. After it innervates these things, it's purely sensory, and the sensory part goes to the lateral forearm. Okay, now this nerve is the axillary nerve, and it has both motor and sensory components. So the first thing it innervates is the top of the quadrangular space that we talked about, which is the little t, or teres minor. And then it also innervates the deltoid muscle. Then after it innervates those two muscles, it is sensory to the lateral deltoid. Then we have the median nerve, which has both sensory and motor components. Like we talked about before, the median nerve doesn't innervate anything in the arm. The first motor branch it has happens right after the bicipital aponeurosis, and this is the anterior interosseous nerve. And this, as we talked about before, goes to the deep flexors. And these are half of the flexor digitorum profundus, the pronator quadratus, and the flexor pollicis longus. And these are the muscles in the deep compartment of the flexor forearm. So the other branch that the median nerve has is more superficial. It's still called the median nerve, and it innervates the superficial flexor compartment of the forearm. He also pierces something. He pierces the pronator teres muscle. And just a reminder that the sensory fibers are following along in the same nerve. So theoretically, if you had a really mad pronator teres muscle and it impinged this nerve right here, you'd both have motor and sensory deficits. So the other things that this nerve innervates in the superficial compartment are the superficial flexors that include the pronator teres, the palmaris longus, the flexor carpi radialis, the flexor digitorum superficialis, and half of the lumbricals. And this would be the lateral half of the lumbricals in anatomical position. And this together can be called the medial wad. So these fibers continue on and go through the carpal tunnel, where the motor branch becomes the thenar branch, or the recurrent branch of the median nerve. And this goes to the flexor pollicis brevis, the opponens pollicis, and the abductor pollicis longus. And these are all around the thumb, so thenar thumb. You can remember it that way. Then the sensory nerve is sensory to the fingers. So it's on the anterior side of the hand, It's sensory to fingers 1 through 3 and half of 4. And on the posterior side, it's sensory to 1 through 3 and a fourth of finger 4. So as you can see here, the median nerve is orange, so on the anterior side it's half of finger 4 and 1 through 3. And then on the posterior side it's the tips of fingers 1 through 3 and only a fourth of finger 4. Now my mnemonic for the radial nerve, the motor parts of the radial nerve, are the beast muscles. So the first thing that the radial nerve innervates is the triceps. Because remember, this is part of the posterior cord, so it's in the posterior arm. And this is the T of beast. Then it lies between the brachialis muscle and the brachioradialis muscle. We already know the brachialis muscle is innervated by the musculocutaneous nerve, but the brachioradialis muscle, as indicated in its name, is innervated by the radial nerve. And this is the B in beast. Then it innervates the extensor carpi radialis longus. And then it divides into the deep radial nerve and the superficial radial nerve. The superficial radial nerve is actually just the sensory part of this nerve, so they just split off. And the superficial part of the radial nerve is sensory to the dorsal web space between the first and second fingers. So as you can see here, the deep radial nerve pierces the supinator, and anything that a nerve pierces, it innervates. So it pierces and innervates the supinator. And once it exits the supinator, it becomes the pin, or the posterior interosseous nerve. And the pin does the extensor forearm, which includes anything that starts with an E, so ECRB, or extensor carpi radialis brevis, extensor digiti minimi, extensor digitorum, extensor carpi ulnaris, extensor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, and extensor indicis. And it also innervates the abductor pollicis longus. And you can hear this be called the extensor wad. So E is extensors, and A is abductor pollicis longus. Okay, and finally we have the ulnar nerve, which the very first thing that we know that it doesn't do anything in the arm, but it does pierce the flexor carpi ulnaris. And once it does that, it gives off its dorsal cutaneous branch. So it does half of finger 4 and finger 5 on the dorsum of the hand, as we can see here. Now here, both the motor and the sensory parts continue on and go through Guillon's canal. And the motor part is the deep ulnar nerve, which innervates the interosseous muscles, all of them, half of the lumbricals, the medial half of the lumbricals, pinky side, and the adductor pollicis. This is a really commonly asked question, so remember that the adductor is the ulnar nerve. And then the sensory part goes to the anterior of the hand, so this is the anterior half of the fourth finger and the fifth finger, as we can see here. And you're all set. I hope you guys do awesome. I know you will. Have fun. Let me know if you have any questions.